Him we proclaim, admonishing everyone and teaching everyone with all wisdom, so that we may present everyone mature in Christ. These are the words of the Apostle Paul, sent by Jesus to make mature disciples for Jesus. The Group Chat Podcast exists to make disciples who love Jesus, His church, and His world. Welcome.
Welcome back, everyone. Group Chat Podcast. Pastor James hosting. I'm joined this week by Pastor Josh Rowland.
Yes, sir.
Pastor Bryan Lachlan.
Thankful to be here.
And Pastor Doug Ponder.
Yes.
We are continuing to work through all of the questions that we got as a part of our Mailbag series. And today we are talking about the topic of parenting. Got a good number of questions related to parenting. I think we have 18 children represented in this room.
Wow.
That does account for Ben, who's our silent partner at the sound booth. And so a wealth of wisdom. I'm excited to chase it together.
He's the 19th child.
That's right. No, I'm kidding. And so we're going to jump right in because there's probably going to be
Don't hurt him, Ben.
Plenty to say. And
Ben's
so
going to edit in something that he's been holding back.
That's
for a long
exactly
time.
right. He's holding all the keys.
Keep it, Ben.
Silent for now, partner. So we got a question about the season of littles, quote unquote. We got a lot of children in our church. Many of them are little, and it's something that people notice immediately when they visit our church is all the kids running around. They're a wonderful joy and a huge task. And so we got a question that was asking, what are encouragements from the pastors to parents of babies and toddlers in staying consistent with discipline when it seems like it's not working, getting through sleepless nights, practical tips. What do we have to say to encourage the many families in our church through this season of parenting very little children, and many of them?
I have older kids now, and getting a little bit older. So I don't know how this relates, but I feel that the early years were less exhausting.
Be encouraged.
Oh, be encouraged.
Be encouraged. You're not that exhausted.
These are some of the least exhausting years you're going to have with kids. So I just wanted to lay that out there.
Thank you for joining us for the Group Chat Podcast, and we're looking forward to seeing you on the next one.
Our next one will cover depression.
But
We'll skip to the suffering set of questions for the next one.
But I didn't think that in the early years.
That's right.
There's no way. I mean, it's so
right.
physically taxing, so hands-on.
That's right.
They require so much
That's right.
attention.
It's a different kind of taxing.
It's a different type of attention required. It's a beautiful attention, but it's different.
Yeah, it's an act of faith. Parenting itself is an act of faith, which by definition then means that you're doing something based on faith and not by sight. So you're not seeing the fruit yet. You might see some fruit quicker than you expected, but that one thing to hold on to is that this is an act of faith. So I'm going to do what God says, even when it isn't immediately fruitful, and that over time that it will bear the fruit that He promised that it would.
And, so one of the things that's helpful to keep in mind is that you are going to feel unique pains in different seasons of parenting, especially particularly the early years, depending on where you're coming from. I think about one of the most helpful passages for me in the Proverbs for our parenting is when it talks about how where there are no oxen, the stable is clean, but the harvest comes by the strength of the ox. And so it's like, hey, productivity and good things can make a mess. You know, as somebody who wants to keep things very tight, that's a good word for me specifically, because one of the pains I'll feel is, man, it's chaos over here. We got to tighten it up. Right. As opposed to parents coming from a different place where they're okay with the chaos. We're going to let the kids do their thing. It's all a joy. But then there's the work of, hey, we actually got to have an orderly home here. So it's also helpful to take stock of the fact that you're going to feel particular pinches based on your just demeanor, how God's made you, your vices, your virtues, just your experience, where you're coming from. It's helpful to budget for those things.
I think it's worth noting, especially the early years. This is the 0 through 6, 5, 6, 7-ish, somewhere in there. You're primarily seeking success looks like obedience in actions. Obedience from the heart is what comes as they reflect on how much they love the good things that God has for them, that you are leading them into. So parenting in these ages is a constant introduction to your kids of all the wonderful life-giving truths and directions they should embrace willfully and love, even though many times they may or may not. But you're seeking obedience in their actions during those seasons. And then as they grow, they're actually able to reflect on the condition of their heart towards those actions. Too many times in the early years, parents get them exactly backwards. They get them flipped, and then therefore, actually, they won't ever be able to get a hold of the heart when they've allowed the heart to run roughshod for 5 to 7 years. Because obedience won't be accomplished at all, much less from the heart. if they miss that.
So what you're saying is earliest years, you're just shooting for raw compliant.
You are shooting for raw, glory-filled, wonderful,
Even if the heart isn't on
Christ-honoring
board for now.
compliance to what is good, beautiful, true, wonderful, according
the
to
law
what
was
our Lord
schoolmaster that led us to the gospel.
Yes, and the law is good and wonderful.
I told my sons when they were in that age, they're not anymore, Mike. We're in the middle years, which honestly, they do feel like a break compared to the early years. So I don't have older children. Maybe I'm about to run into an absolute gauntlet, according to what Pastor Bryan is telling me.
It's a brief, deep breath.
It's a brief, deep breath.
There it is.
There's a lot of tongue twisters out there that are not hard. Like unique New York. I love New York. You need New York. I know
we know
unique
you
New
can
York.
do it. You
Those
still
aren't
messed
hard. But a brief, deep breath. That one got me.
Wow.
What were we saying? Oh, yeah. So we do feel like we're getting a little bit of a breather here, which is nice. However, here's what I would say to someone who's still in the trenches of the early years. It's the person who's asking this question. Many of the moms and dads in our church are there. Don't forget that all of that stuff is purposeful.
Yeah.
The cleaning of messes, the doing of laundry, it doesn't feel purposeful. It doesn't feel spiritual, right, when you're doing it, but it is.
It's not
the Lord
wasted
actually
time.
uses that to help you die to yourself so that he can raise you, right, in the Spirit of Christ. He can raise you up to be an even more godly, selfless, sacrificial, loving, and strong man or woman than you otherwise would have been. So, when you're in the trenches and all that stuff's happening and you're like, my gosh, I can't wait to get out of this season. Well, the seasons change. And as Bryan said, there are different challenges. So you will sleep more, but you also might worry more because now your child can make decisions and you can't control those. Right? So things will shift. Just remember, all this stuff is purposeful. The Lord is using these things to mold us and shape us into the image of Christ. And last thing I'll say, if you're a mom of multiples, the fastest way to find out how much you've grown is ship a few of those kids off to grandma.
Oh, good grief,
Keep
yeah.
one behind, and it'll feel like
that's right.
it's so easy, right?
Wow.
So, but then also
When you had
remember
the
when
one.
you had just the one.
That's right.
You felt like you were drowning. You're like, oh my gosh, how does anybody have more than one kid? And now you've got 4, maybe 5. We have families with 6 and 7. If they had just one overnight, they'd be like, this is a vacation. What is happening here? Well, how did that happen? The same way a weightlifter, if it adds more plates and more plates and more plates, if he were to go back to the first plate that he started with, man, he'd be doing reps so fast he might hit himself with the bar. But when he's gained weight over time incrementally, and the Lord does all that in our lives
I
as well.
love the weightlifting illustration too, Doug, because that weightlifter, with his new PR, with his new max, still feels like he's hitting the point of failure.
Yeah.
Hey guys, Pastor James here. Group Chat Podcast is a ministry of Remnant Church in Richmond, Virginia. Remnant Church recently launched our 1 million in 1 year campaign to fund the purchase of properties that will serve as ministry space, a third location for worship, as well as classrooms for New City Academy. If you are a member of Remnant Church, remember to be praying about how to dig deep and joyfully and sacrificially give to the 1 million in 1 year campaign. Even if you aren't a member, if you have benefited from the Group Chat Podcast or have been blessed by the ministry of Remnant Church, consider partnering with us by contributing to the 1 million in 1 year campaign. To find out more, check out some videos of what God has been doing in our midst, and to make your pledge, click on the link in the show notes.
So it's like it always is like, this is still really hard. And it's like, you have to look back and see how much has grown over the time. I think it's important too, you guys were given the raw compliance, the goal of each phase of parenting. I think that matters so much because one of the great heartaches, I think, for a lot of parents, and I've been there many times, comes from confusing that. So you have your 3-year-old and you're pleading with them to understand the motivation behind why you just asked them to do this thing, and you just love them so much and you want them to see this great love you have, and they're like, I do not care. There's little terrorists who are like waiting for you to stop so they can go do something else, or whatever it might be. And they just don't get it. And so they're in the process of going from folly to wisdom, but they're not yet wise. And so like Proverbs 17:10 always comes to mind. It says that a rebuke does more for a wise man than 100 blows to the back of a fool. But if you're not wise, then the rebuke doesn't do anything. And so you have to actually have the rod of discipline that drives the folly far from you to get you to the point of wisdom so that the rebuke can work. So there is a natural order to these things that if you subvert it, you actually can't get to the point where you can have those conversations. And there's much frustration when you mix them up.
Yeah, so I think about the scriptures, the way it talks about encouragement, there's always encouragement with and encouragement to. And so part of what we are encouraging parents to or toward is to not make things harder than they have to be by embracing all the scriptures, exhortations to bring our children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, get them on on board. Don't let them drag you around by your teeth. But also the encouragement with the fact that God is growing you through those things, that this is just a part of the path of dying to self, where we look more like Jesus, actually gain a whole bunch of strength in the way you were talking about, Doug, even though you always feel like you're operating out of fatigue and weakness, which again is a bug and not a feature, that we are taught to boast in our weaknesses and rely on Christ's strength in all of these things. We had questions about very specific tasks when it comes to parenting and some of the things they're trying to navigate. One person messaged in and asked, how do I encourage my sons to rein in their masculine energy without squashing it? In other words, to focus on self-discipline and respect instead of docility. It's something we've talked about at length in the NCA podcast, and we can link some of those episodes. How do we raise distinctly boys and girls with these different pitfalls and strengths and all those things? But what would you say to that particular question?
I've got 4 boys.
Yeah, you do.
They fight a lot. They wrestle a lot. They play with swords that we should never have bought them. One year for Christmas, my wife and I decided, let's get them swords that won't break.
Full metal, sharp.
They're not metal, but they are of such a hard plastic that not only do they not break, they now may break bones.
That's right.
And so we've had some serious busted knuckle injuries. So what I've told them is, listen, if you're going to sword fight with your brothers, which is a fine thing to do, you need to know this is a possibility, and that comes with the territory. What I don't want to do is to take these things away and put my kids in bubbles where, especially as men, they are somehow shielded from adversity, hardship, pain, toil, the things that God wants to use to grow them into future men who can actually meet much bigger challenges in their lives, much greater risks that they must take in order to do. So if they're fighting and one hits one of his brothers and it's an accident, and then that brother retaliates on purpose, right? Swings for the head, right? So we have this conversation.
Off with his head.
I remind him, hey, you were sword fighting. You knew that this could happen. I am sorry that he hit your hand and that your knuckle's bloody, but it's not okay to retaliate like this, right? To swing for the head on purpose. So I help him see the volition. What I don't do, again, is say, sword fighting's dangerous, boys. That's why we're not going to do it anymore in the household. So I think there's a principle here of not discouraging young boy energy, but do redirect it. Tell them, I love that you want to run, but you're not running in the house. I love that you like to jump and run and play. That's why we got you a jungle gym in the backyard, but you're not doing that on your bunk beds. So you're helping them learn appropriate places and inappropriate places so that the actions are not wrong. The energy is not wrong. They're immature. So they're going to go overboard sometimes, or they're going to do it in the wrong places. And you're just redirecting them in the right places where it should be expressed.
I think part of what helps walk that process out is having a scriptural vision for how growth happens. That there's no growth that prevents thorns and things that need to be pruned. That you're even just the picture of John 15, that as we grow, abiding in the vine, the Father prunes us so that we can bear more fruit. And that's just a part of the process when it comes to parenting, is you're trying to nurture some good things. Some bad things are going to grow out of that, and you can expect that, not be alarmed by that, and then trying to prune those things as they come. I think part of what gets people jammed up is they try to do like pre-pruning, try to make this plant grow up in such a way that there are never any thorns, there are never any brambles, there's nothing to prune there, instead of having the patience and one of the things we've talked about, the hope to let the boys be boys, for example, in this illustration. They'll let the boys be boys, expect some chaos, and then help them over time rein those things in, so all that's left is the vine without the things that need to be pruned.
Yeah, the boys be boys cannot be used as an excuse for unbridled dereliction across the board. So there was some old popular wisdom I used to heard years ago, that there's a time and place.
Yes, that's right,
for certain things. So you take, for instance, on Sunday mornings, right? The time with God's people gathered together to worship, to show respect towards one another, to be respectful towards one another, is not the time for wild, unbridled warfare amongst youth boys running throughout the sanctuary, jumping off the pulpit and the stage, and
John
chalking that up. Yeah, this is not that time to say, well, I don't want to stifle the young boys, because that would be to smothering that young masculinity. I want to funnel it in the right way. Sure, there's some thorns. Well, it's time to prune immediately.
Sure.
And
It's funny
on
'cause
that Sunday morning.
The time and place is another way of saying wisdom. And then
Yes.
the Proverbs are always telling us that we
right.
need to lead them into wisdom. And so, in some senses, it's kind of simple. It's just like, what do you want a godly adult male to be like? Let's begin leading them into that.
Yeah, it always accords with what actually they're going to be doing as godly adults. What is good, what is fitting, what is loving. There's a time to go to bed. There's a time to get up. There's a time to be seated as we eat at the dinner table. There's a time to get up and play. There's a time and place that's fitting and loving for all peoples, and that includes young boys and old boys.
Yeah. To the point, though, I think, James, I like the thorn imagery. There's a theological underpinning that is that, like, sin has no substance of its own. It perverts the good. And so just a really practical way to talk about that with your boys is exactly that. That it's like, this is the good thing underneath the sinful thing that you just did. So we repent of the sin and we encourage the good. And so as parents, it is also, to piggyback off what Doug said a second ago, talking about just having to be involved. And Bryan, you just talked about dereliction. There is a sense in which this requires more of you as a parent. They were like, hey, let's let that boy energy out. Let's go talk about well, that means that my 7-year-old and my 4-year-old are asking me almost every day if I can go shoot hoops with them. And I talked about for years how I could not wait till my boys were old enough to shoot hoops with me. And now it's like every single day. As soon as I walk in, they're like, Dad's home. You want to play basketball? You want to shoot hoops?
Get to work, Dad.
And I'm like, dang. No, I want to sit down. But actually, they have all of this energy that actually needs to be. I don't know where I got it from. Someone told me once. They talked about raising boys, and they said, exhaust and employ. Exhaust and employ. They're like, just, you got to give them a task. They want to accomplish something. Let them run. That actually requires you to think, plan, be involved, be present. It's if you just say, hey, y'all go do something over there, then it doesn't end well. The dereliction.
Can I speak to the flip of this real quick? There are some, because sin perverts. There's the opposite perversion, which is there are some young boys who have flaws and tendencies that if they're not checked in the other direction, they'll grow up to be cowardly men who create a bunch of problems on the other side of the table. And so I have a couple boys who sometimes will manifest these things. And so we do hard things as a family. We hike hard, like 3, 4, 5 mile hikes up tall mountains. And as they complain or things like that, I use these as opportunities to talk to them about what it looks like to face adversity, to overcome these things, so that they're not, and I'm not a slave master. I'm not driving them so hard that they're just falling to pieces. I know their limits, right? I know their frame. I'm not God. I might get it wrong, but I also know that if they never face adversity, if they never learn to overcome difficulties, then they're going to have the opposite problem that this question is asking about, and they're going to be passive men who abdicate for the rest of their life. And those guys create as many problems, if not more, than the ones who are too harsh.
More culturally acceptable problems currently, but they are problems nonetheless.
For sure.
That's right. And God's design leads us in both of those tasks. So getting somebody who maybe is not stepping to as much adversity, hard things, to say, hey, this is what God made men for, to inspire them to step into the role that God has created them for. But then also when those things go off the rails, say, hey, no, let me tell you the great purpose that God has for these things and how we master all of these temperaments and all of these dispositions God's given us so that they can find their glorious outlet for all of these wonderful purposes, constantly keeping the end in mind.
That is great in the middle years and the later years. Just to bring it back to what Bryan said, when your 4-year-old hits somebody with the hard die-cast Thomas the Tank Engine, you don't have a long talk about the purpose of strength.
Exactly
you tell them you're not allowed to hit your brother with Thomas the Tank Engine, or by the way, any toy for that matter, right? But
sounds like there's a personal story there.
Yeah, we won't chase it. But we got another question, similar, but maybe more leaning toward raising girls from the questioner here. How do we guide children through their emotions and feelings? How do I teach my kids that feelings are good, but actions from those feelings can be sinful? How do I learn to control my emotions? What does God have to say about these things? So when it comes to the emotional life of children, how do we understand these things?
Well, not all feelings are good.
True.
So the capacity for feeling or the ability to have feelings, that is good in the abstract, all right? But a feeling can be wrong. And that's not a culturally popular thing to say, but it is true. So sometimes the Bible will say you have a feeling, be careful not to sin with that feeling, right? In your anger, do not sin, things like that. But other times the Bible rebukes certain feelings themselves, or even commands us to have certain feelings. Like God says, rejoice always. Right. That's a command. He's actually telling you to have a feeling, to be joyful. Do not be anxious about anything, right? But in everything with prayer and supplication.
Fear not, the most frequent command in the Scriptures.
Don't be afraid, right? So there are certain feelings that are actually inappropriate, even though I do feel them. And so I think maybe the first place to start is not by saying, well, we know feelings are good, we just don't want to sin with our feelings. We actually have to back up a step and say, there are some times where actually the feeling itself is an expression that my mind, my heart, my soul are not as fully aligned with God's world as it ought to be in light of everything he's revealed about who he is and what he's done for me.
Yeah, the Scriptures give us a category of faithful feelings. What are feelings that accord with truth, what God says is right, what our circumstances are. And so one of the first questions should be, is this a faithful feeling? And if not, how do I help my children see what a faithful feeling is, what the truth is, what's going on in front of us, what our reactions should be, and not letting these things just spiral in whatever direction that they might naturally go.
I have 4 kids, 2 girls, 2 boys, 2 girls up front. Boys and girls have a lot of different feelings. Girls have a lot of different feelings. Just true. It's utterly true.
You in a text.
It's very true. However, again, a lot of times is you can't. People respond the way they respond. Feelings kind of passively happen to us. The question is, what do we do with those feelings when they occur? I mean, there can be different life stages, circumstances, going through puberty that actually result in all types of physiological changes that may evoke different types of feelings in different types of settings. But as you guys have been saying, ultimately, you need to disciple your children into understanding how to think about their feelings in light of what's good, what's true, what's wonderful, what does it look like for us to embrace the truth, live in certain ways. Are those faithful feelings, like you're saying? Your conversation needs to look different than the world. That ultimately their starting point is, well, how do you feel? Mm-hmm. And that's not the starting point of the Scriptures.
Right. How do you feel, and then what produced those feelings, and then that's actually the source of your problems.
Oh, that's right.
It's like this is sacrilegious almost in our culture to say, but it's like God made hormones and knew about hormones also when he commanded all of these things. Yeah. And so it's like those are all exactly real. They give us understanding. I heard somebody say one time, emotions are like the nervous system of the soul. So at some level, it's like it shows you what you're feeling, but none of that tells you what's actually good or right or wrong. That's right. And so even if the circumstances are explanatory to why someone's feeling a certain thing, we are still beholden to submit it to the Lord and actually to do what he says.
So there's a woman named Rachel Jankovic. She's a mom of 7, maybe 8. She's written a couple books. One's called Loving the Little Years. Another one's called Fit to Burst. And they're both about motherhood in the trenches. And in one of those chapters, they're all short chapters. Of course they are, because a mom of 7 or 8 doesn't have time to write long books. But in one of those chapters, she talks specifically about this. She's got a lovely metaphor of a horse and a rider. And she has taught her children to see a horse as something like their emotions. So you have a bridle in the horse's mouth, and you're supposed to be able to steer it where it's supposed to go. But occasionally, horse gets a mind of his own, bucks the rider, drags you off to places you should never be. When that happens, she'll point that out to her kids and say, you let the horse run away with you. You're way over here in the mud. You're off the path, and we need to get back on that horse and get back where we need to be. So that she's affirming that, yes, you have a lot of things you're feeling and they're going on, and there's compassion there and all of that. But at the same time, there's no excuse making. Right. So you're helping them recognize it's still your job to control these things to the best of your ability so that you can honor the Lord and not destroy others.
Well, a lot of this is also related to the fatherly role. Dad should be the tone setter. So there's a unique, distinct presence the dad has in the household that acts as a proper, godly, good regulating force, if you will, of how we should be thinking about things collectively, how we should be feeling about these things, and also what are we going to do in light of our current circumstances. So fathers have to continue to step into those things. I was out of town recently, about 9 days, and that was one of the things that my wife said in passing was, "I'm just glad you're home. Things are just different when you're in the house."
Yep, heard the same thing.
And of course, that's the case because fathers have a unique role, so do mothers as well in regards to all these things. But especially fathers need to take the lead in actually shaping this conversation.
Yeah, one quick thing I would add was just the significance and all these things of shepherding the heart. You're trying to pay attention to what the heart is doing, especially for our girls. I'll delineate the difference between April and I have had conversations. There are times when like one of our girls will get swept up in an emotion, and then there are distinct other circumstances where they will pick up an emotion, they'll wield an emotion. And so just even discerning the heart posture, okay, are you getting caught up and Dad needs to help you navigate this? Or are you picking up that emotion? You picking up those tears as a battering ram to try to get your way, because sometimes it's easier to see.
Cry bully.
That's a cry bully, yeah. So I'll had the conversation with our girls and say, hey, do you think you can scream at me to get what you want? And they're like, no. I said, well, hey, you can't cry at me to try to get what you want either. And in this moment, you're picking up those tears to try to get what you want, and that's not what we're going to do here. But again, even just one set of tears versus another set of tears
shut
can be
them
very
off
different. Yeah, and you can tell the difference. So just trying to steer and discern the heart. We got a couple more questions to get through. One question came in about family planning, that there's a call to be fruitful and multiply, and childbearing is a gift from the Lord, a stewardship. But then there's the question of, okay, is it wise to cease having more children if your heart posture is to steward the children as God given you? Should we be thinking about the command to be fruitful and multiply along the lines of a quiverful movement? Is there any, basically the heart of the question is there any time to discern, hey, I think that our family has multiplied to a sufficient level and we're going to make the conscious choice to cease childbearing by one means or another?
I will try to do this as quickly as possible. I think the answer is yes. There are times where families can make that decision. And yet, I would say that the vast majority of families in the West who do, when that time comes, make that decision, often do it for reasons that Christians around the globe and across history would say seem pretty selfish and self-centered. So there's no magic number the scriptures give. There's a lot of reasons for that. But in general, it reminds us that children are a heritage from the Lord. They're your connection point with the future, that the more children that you have in a way that you are, if provided you are actually loving them, raising them well, and all those things, your family is richly blessed, and that's a glorious thing. But when it comes to questions about birth control and that sort of thing, I think the challenges of today include the fact that we don't all live on farms anymore. We have car-dependent cultures where there are strange and difficult questions that we're having to think through when it comes to how large of a family is it possible to have, not just to afford to feed, but even just to live in this time and place. And yes, I know there are 15 passenger vans. Mm-hmm. That's true. But if you have 25 kids, even that wouldn't be enough. So there are some complicating questions here. So I think the best thing to do is just to continually look at the heart and say, what are you after here? Do you really believe that children are a glorious blessing from God, an important gift that's part of how He grows His people across the world, blesses you, blesses others, and all the rest? Or have you drunk too deeply from the wells of a modern anti-child mindset, and your desire is to have just enough so that other Christians don't judge you, but so few that you don't actually step to the vision that God has for families that look like they're full of life?
All right. Final question that we got on this topic was around family devotions, family worship. What does that look like in your homes? What are some ways to create an aroma of Christ in the home and to foster that dynamic?
I'll just start by adding the aroma of Christ is what's primary. Gospel culture, the waters that your house swims in, is the most important. Mm-hmm. This is not to the neglect of tools like devotion and family worship, but those are in complement to a joy-filled home full of laughter, full of grace, mm-hmm. full of forgiveness, full of love, yes, full of missteps. But those things happen, and therefore we turn from those things.
Full of confession, repentance, forgiveness.
All of those things. There should be a full gospel, joy-filled household that reflects the aroma of Christ and His grace in your house. And therefore, your family worship time should complement promoting those things. Obviously, there's going to need to be some frequency to those things, but those ebb and flow over time. So we've tried all sorts of different things over the years. Some stick, some don't, some work better than others. But ultimately, even in your goal of your particular family worship time, or we've been working through the Westminster Shorter Catechism for about 3 years now. We're on question 80. I'm on question 90, I think, right now, which is great. But it's been 3 years. We've missed a lot of weeks, a lot of nights, right? We could have been done sooner if we had muscled through and that sort of thing, and like really sat down and loved the Lord with this kind of like very intense, legalistic, harsh mindset. So, leading kids to love and fear and know the Lord and being trained in His admonition ultimately is something that all of these family worship things complement and need to be a part of it. But I think we too many times Christians may take them too seriously.
So the base layer is always Deuteronomy 6, just talking about these things. When we're laying down, we're walking around the way, just constantly pointing to how good God is, the way He's made His world, how everything connects to Him, just a joy-filled reflection on the implications in all of life for the fact that we have a God. He's good. He sent His Son. He's near to us. He has a word for us in all things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the form and substance conversation, I think, in a lot of ways, that you can do family worship every single night at the dinner table, and then when suffering hits and you refuse to trust the Lord, it's like, well, you missed it. You know what I mean? In many ways, you weren't really. I guess it was doing family something. I don't know if it was worship. So it's the substance is what we're after, and so forgiving one another, a house where people confess freely and repent frequently, and where we're talking about the Lord all the time. We're filled with the joy of the Lord that Nehemiah 8 says is our strength, and all of those kinds of things. And then that bleeds into even the way that you do family worship. And so it's good to sit there and do it. But if you're doing family worship in drudgery and frustration, and you're yelling at all the kids because they're not getting it right,
obligation, frustration,
right. You're messing up my family worship. It's I think it's missing it. And so we want to.
It's just set aside formal rhythms in the life of your family to teach the kids the Scriptures.
That's right,
and teach them the good things of God. And there's various tools to actually accomplish that, various means to accomplish that. But that's the major substantive goal.
That's good. All right, guys. Well, always plenty more to say, but we love all of our families. They're in the task. We're praying for them. And as always, this is an ongoing conversation, requires wisdom. That's why we have community groups. That's why pastors are available. And we're always walking it out together. But we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Group Chat Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and check out the links below if you're interested in more. Until next time, grace and peace.